it didn't happen all at once. That was what made it worse. Ava Reynolds didn't realize her heart was breaking until it was already gone. At first, it was small things. The way Daniel Carter stopped asking how her day went. The way his replies became shorter, slower, careful, not cold enough to question, but not warm enough to feel safe. So she adjusted. She spoke less. She asked for less. She told herself love didn't always have to be loud to be real. And Daniel, he noticed everything, just not the things that mattered. He saw her smile, but not the way it faded when he looked away. He heard her voice, but not the silence underneath it, because Ava never demanded attention. She never forced answers. She never made him choose. That was her mistake, because when the moment finally came, the one moment that required truth, Daniel didn't ask. He didn't stay. He didn't even try to understand. He just walked away. No fight, no explanation, no second look. And just like that, the love she protected so carefully ended in silence. But what Daniel didn't know was that silence doesn't erase love. It buries it. And buried things have a way of coming back. Ava Reynolds loved in a way that was easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. Not because it was small, but because it was quiet. She wasn't the kind of woman who filled rooms with laughter or demanded reassurance with words. She didn't need grand gestures or constant attention. To her, love was not something you proved loudly. It was something you lived gently, consistently, without question. With Daniel Carter, it showed in the details, in the way she remembered how he liked his coffee. No sugar, just a touch of cream, and had it ready before he even asked. In the way she noticed when his voice sounded tired, even when he insisted he was fine. In the way she gave him space when he needed silence, trusting that he would come back when he was ready. She never chased. She never pressured. She simply stayed. And to Ava, that was love. Steady, patient, certain. Daniel never had to wonder where he stood with her. Not once. Even on the days he pulled away, when his replies became distant and his presence harder to reach, Ava didn't react the way most people would. She didn't demand explanations. She didn't question his feelings. Instead, she softened. She told herself he was just tired, stressed, overwhelmed. So she gave more understanding, more patience, more silence. Because in her mind, love wasn't about being right. It was about being there. And she was always there. If Daniel needed quiet, she became quiet. If he needed distance, she stepped back without complaint. If he needed time, she gave it freely. What she didn't realize was that in loving him this way, she was slowly disappearing. Not all at once. Not in a way anyone could point to and say, there. That's where she lost herself. It happened in smaller ways. In the questions she chose not to ask. In the feelings she chose not to express. In the moment she told herself, this is enough, even when it wasn't, because Ava believed something deeply, something she had never learned to question, that if you loved someone the right way, they would never choose to hurt you. So she loved Daniel the only way she knew how, completely, quietly, without conditions. And for a long time, it felt like enough. He stayed. He came back. He didn't leave. And that was all the reassurance she needed, until the day it wasn't, until the day her silence no longer held them together, but gave him the space to walk away. And Ava never saw it coming. Daniel Carter was not a man without feelings. That was never the problem. If anything, he felt too much. He noticed everything. The shift in someone's tone, the hesitation before a word, the silence that stretched just a second too long. He understood emotions instinctively, the way some people understood numbers or patterns. But understanding something and expressing it were two very different things. And Daniel had never learned how to do both. With Ava, it had been easy in the beginning. She didn't demand explanations. She didn't push for answers he didn't know how to give. She didn't force him into conversations he wasn't ready to have. Being with her felt quiet, safe. Like he didn't have to explain himself to be understood. So he didn't. When he cared, he showed it in ways that felt natural to him. He stayed longer than he planned. He listened more than he spoke. He noticed when she was tired and pulled her closer, without asking why. To Daniel, those things meant everything. But they were never things he said out loud, because words to him were dangerous. They could be misunderstood, used against you, or worse, expected again and again until they became something you had to live up to. And Daniel didn't trust expectations. So when something felt too heavy, too complicated, too close to something he couldn't control, he withdrew, not because he didn't care, but because caring made him feel exposed. There were moments, rare, fleeting, when he almost said something real. Moments when Ava would look at him with quiet patience, waiting not for perfection, but for honesty. And he felt it then, the urge to tell her, to say that she mattered more than he let on, that her presence had become something he relied on, that losing her would be something he didn't know how to handle. But the words never came. They stayed somewhere inside him, unspoken, unfinished, safe, because one said they would become real, and real things could be lost. So instead, he chose silence. He convinced himself it was better this way, that Ava understood him without needing explanations, that what they had didn't need to be defined to be real. And for a while, that belief held, because Ava didn't push. She didn't question the gaps. She filled them with patience, with understanding, with a kind of love that asked for nothing in return. And Daniel let her. He didn't realize what that meant. Didn't realize that every unspoken truth created distance, that every avoided conversation built something fragile between them, something that looked strong, but had never been tested, because Daniel had spent his entire life believing one thing: if you don't say it, you can't lose it. He didn't know yet that silence doesn't protect what you love. It slowly teaches it how to live without you. It happened on a day that felt like every other. No warning, no sense that anything was about to break. Ava had woken up early, the soft gray light of morning settling quietly through her window. For a moment, she just lay there, thinking of Daniel, of the way he had sounded the night before, distant but not unfamiliar. She told herself it was nothing, just another quiet phase, another moment he needed space. So she moved through her routine the way she always did, calm, steady, certain that whatever distance existed between them would close again, the way it always had. By afternoon, she decided to see him, not because something was wrong, but because something felt off, the kind of feeling she couldn't explain, only sense. When she arrived, the door wasn't fully closed. That alone made her pause. Daniel was careful, intentional, the kind of man who didn't leave things half done. She knocked lightly anyway. No answer. So she stepped inside. And that was when everything shifted. It wasn't dramatic. There were no raised voices. No obvious betrayal waiting to be discovered. Just a moment. Simple. Still. Misunderstood. Daniel stood across the room, his back slightly turned, his posture tense in a way she hadn't seen before. And near him, too close, too familiar, was someone else. A woman Ava recognized only vaguely. Their conversation had just ended, or maybe Ava had interrupted it. She couldn't tell. But what she did see was the way Daniel didn't step back immediately, the way his silence stretched, the way his expression changed the second he noticed her. Not guilt, not exactly, but something that felt wrong. Ava didn't speak right away. She waited, not for an explanation, just for him to say something, anything, but Daniel didn't. And in that silence, something fragile began to crack. "I didn't know you had company," she said finally, her voice softer than she expected. Measured, careful. Daniel's response came too late, and not in the way she needed. "It's not what you think." The words were familiar, too familiar, and suddenly, Ava realized something she hadn't prepared herself for. He wasn't explaining. He was defending. The difference was small, but it was everything. Because if he had nothing to hide, why did it feel like he was already closing off? "I didn't say anything," she replied quietly. And that was true. She hadn't accused him, hadn't raised her voice, hadn't even moved closer. She was still giving him space, still trusting him to meet her halfway. But Daniel didn't step forward. Instead, he held his ground, guarded, distant, already pulling away from something that hadn't even been said. The room felt colder. He glanced at the other woman briefly, then back at Ava, as if calculating something she couldn't see. And that was the moment everything changed. Not because of what was happening, but because of what wasn't. He didn't reassure her, didn't reach for her, didn't close the distance. He chose distance. Again, and this time, Ava felt it, not as confusion, but as something deeper, something final. Because for the first time, she wasn't sure if his silence meant peace, or the beginning of goodbye. The silence didn't break. It settled, heavy, unmoving, final in a way Ava had never felt before. She was still standing near the door, her fingers loosely curled at her side, her mind searching for something, anything, that would make this moment make sense. Daniel had always been quiet, but this wasn't the same kind of quiet. This felt like distance, intentional, chosen. The other woman spoke first, her voice light, almost dismissive, something casual, something that didn't belong in the tension that had filled the room. Ava didn't hear the words. They didn't matter, because she was still watching Daniel, waiting, not for perfection, not for a long explanation, just for something real, a step forward, a shift in his expression, a sign that he saw her standing there, not just physically, but fully. But Daniel didn't move. His jaw tightened slightly, his gaze flickering for a brief second before settling into something guarded, controlled, closed, and Ava felt it then, that quiet, sinking realization. He had already decided how this would go. "I can explain," he said finally, but even as the words left his mouth, they felt empty, not because they weren't true, but because he wasn't trying to understand. He wasn't asking what she saw, wasn't asking what she felt, wasn't asking anything at all. He was preparing to leave. Ava took a slow breath. "You don't have to explain," she said. And maybe in another moment, those words would have meant trust. But now, they felt like surrender. Daniel's eyes searched hers, just for a second, as if he was looking for something. A reaction, anger, accusation. Something that would justify staying. Something that would force the conversation to happen. But Ava gave him nothing. Not because she didn't feel it, but because she didn't know how to fight for something that wasn't reaching back. And that was all it took. That absence, that space between them. Daniel stepped back. Not dramatically, not harshly, just enough to create distance. Just enough to make it easier to leave. And Ava felt it, clearer than anything that had happened so far. He wasn't choosing her. Not in this moment. Not when it mattered. "You should go," he said quietly. The words were calm, measured, almost gentle, but they landed harder than anything else. Ava didn't move at first. Not because she didn't hear him, but because a part of her still believed, still hoped, that he would take it back, that he would stop her, that he would realize what he was doing before it was too late. But Daniel stayed where he was, watching, waiting, not for her to stay, but for her to leave. And slowly, something inside Ava shifted. Not loudly, not in a way anyone else would notice, but enough for her to understand what this moment really was. Not confusion, not misunderstanding, not something that needed time to be explained. A choice. And Daniel had made his. So Ava nodded, a small, almost invisible movement. Then she turned. No words, no questions, because the truth was no longer something she needed to hear. It was something she had already seen. And behind her, Daniel didn't call her back, didn't ask her to wait, didn't try to stop what was already breaking. He let her walk away, without asking a single question, without giving her a single reason to stay. And just like that, silence stopped being comfort and became the thing that ended everything. The world didn't stop when Ava walked away. That was the first thing she noticed. The street outside was the same. Cars passing, voices blending into the background, life continuing without hesitation. Nothing had shifted, nothing had paused, and yet everything inside her had. She walked without direction at first, her steps steady only because she forced them to be. Each breath felt deliberate, like something she had to remember how to do. It didn't feel real, not yet, because heartbreak, when it comes without noise, doesn't hit all at once. It lingers. It waits. It settles slowly into the spaces you don't expect. Ava didn't cry immediately. There were no tears as she moved through the city, no visible signs that something inside her had just broken. Only silence, the same silence that had followed her out of his apartment, the same silence he had chosen instead of answers. By the time she reached home, the weight of it had begun to grow. Her apartment felt unfamiliar, too quiet, too still. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it for a moment, her eyes fixed on nothing in particular. This was where she used to feel safe, where everything made sense. But now, even the space felt different, because Daniel wasn't just gone from her life. He was gone without explanation, and that absence was louder than anything he could have said. Ava moved slowly, almost mechanically. She set her bag down, took off her shoes, walked into the living room. Every action felt disconnected, like she was watching herself from a distance. And then, without warning, her mind went back, not to the woman, not to the moment she walked in, but to him, to the way he stood there, the way he didn't reach for her, the way he let the silence grow instead of breaking it. That was the part that hurt, not what she saw, but what he didn't do, because Ava could have handled the truth. She could have faced anything if he had just said it, if he had looked at her and explained, if he had given her something, anything, to hold on to. But he hadn't. He had left her with questions, with space, with silence. And now, that silence followed her everywhere. She sat down slowly, her hands resting in her lap, her fingers tightening without her noticing. Her chest felt heavy, tight in a way she couldn't release. And finally it came, not loud, not uncontrollable, just quiet tears slipping down her face, one after the other, because there was no one there to see them. No one to stop them. No one to explain why this had happened. Ava lowered her head, her breath unsteady now, her composure finally breaking in the only place she allowed it to, alone. And in that moment, one thought settled deeper than the rest. Not anger, not betrayal, but something far more painful. She didn't know what she had lost, because he never told her what went wrong. And somehow, that hurt more than the ending itself. Because a heart can heal from truth, but silence leaves wounds with no shape, no name, no way to close them. And Ava realized, sitting there in the quiet of her own home, she hadn't just lost Daniel. She had lost the chance to understand why. The first few days felt the heaviest, not because Ava didn't understand what had happened, but because there was nothing to hold on to, no explanation to replay. No argument to analyze, no final words to revisit and question, just silence. And slowly, she began to realize something she hadn't expected. If there were no answers, then there was nothing left to wait for. At first, the change was small, almost unnoticeable. She stopped checking her phone as often, stopped rereading old messages, searching for something she might have missed, stopped imagining what she would say if he suddenly came back. Not because she didn't care, but because she was tired of hoping for something that had already chosen to leave. Her days became quieter, but not in the same way as before. This quiet felt different, less heavy, less dependent. She began to fill her time with things she had once pushed aside. Morning walks she never used to take, books she never had the focus to finish, long moments of stillness where she wasn't waiting for anything or anyone. For the first time in a long time, Ava was present, not in a relationship, not in someone else's emotional space, just in her own. It wasn't easy. There were nights when the silence returned, pressing against her chest in a way that felt familiar. Nights when her mind drifted back to him, without permission, to his voice, his presence, the way things used to feel before everything changed. And sometimes it hurt, but not the same way. The pain no longer felt sharp. It felt distant, like something she could observe, instead of something that controlled her. And that was when the shift truly began. Ava started noticing things about herself she had ignored before. The way she used to hold back her thoughts, even when they mattered. The way she made herself smaller to keep things peaceful. The way she gave more than she received, without ever asking for balance. She had called it love, but now she saw it differently. It wasn't just love. It was compromise without boundaries. And for the first time, Ava questioned it, not with regret, but with clarity. She began to speak more, even in small ways. Simple things. What she liked, what she didn't, what she felt. Not to anyone in particular. Just out loud, as if reminding herself that her voice existed, that it mattered, and slowly, something inside her settled, not into who she used to be, but into someone new, someone who still felt deeply, but no longer lost herself in the process, someone who could love without disappearing. By the time weeks had passed, Ava no longer woke up thinking about what she had lost. She woke up thinking about what she had learned, and for the first time since that day, there was no question sitting in her chest, no need for answers, no need for closure, because somewhere along the way, without even realizing it, she had given that to herself, and in doing so, she became someone Daniel Carter had never known, not the woman who waited, not the woman who stayed silent, but someone stronger, someone clearer, someone who would never again confuse love with losing herself. And this time, if someone chose to walk away, she wouldn't follow. She wouldn't wait. She would simply let them go. At first, Daniel didn't notice the difference. Not immediately. Life moved the way it always had. Structured, controlled, predictable. His days filled themselves with work, conversations that required nothing personal, routines that didn't ask questions he didn't want to answer. And for a while, it worked, because Ava had never been loud in his life. She didn't leave behind chaos, didn't demand space, didn't force her presence into every moment. So when she was gone, it felt quiet, manageable. He told himself it was better this way. Less complicated, less pressure, less of that feeling he could never quite name when she looked at him like she understood more than he said. But then, slowly, the absence began to take shape. It showed up in the smallest places, in the silence after long days when there was no message waiting, in the moments he reached for his phone out of habit and stopped, in conversations that felt empty even when they sounded full. Ava had never filled space. She had given it meaning, and now it was gone. Daniel started noticing things he hadn't before. The way she used to listen, not just to respond, but to understand. The way she never interrupted, never rushed him, never made him feel like he had to be more than he was ready to be. She had made it easy for him. Too easy. So easy, he never realized what it cost her. At night, the thoughts came more clearly, not as regret at first, but as questions. Why hadn't she argued? Why hadn't she fought harder to stay? Why had she just accepted it? The answers didn't come. Only the memory of her standing there. Quiet, steady, giving him space even as he pushed her away. And something about that memory began to shift, because the more he thought about it, the more it didn't feel like weakness. It felt like strength, a strength he hadn't understood, or appreciated, or deserved. Daniel leaned back one evening, the room around him too still, too empty, his thoughts circling the same place they always returned to. That moment, the one he had walked away from, he replayed again. This time differently. He noticed what he hadn't before. The way Ava had waited, not accusing, not angry, just open. The way she had given him the chance to speak, to explain, to choose her. And he hadn't, not because he didn't care, but because he didn't know how to stay when things became uncertain. So he had done what he always did. He chose distance and called it control. But now, sitting in the quiet she left behind, Daniel saw it clearly for what it was. Avoidance, fear, loss that he had created himself. His chest tightened slightly, something unfamiliar settling in. Not confusion, not denial, something heavier, something final. Regret. Because for the first time, Daniel Carter understood something he had spent his entire life avoiding. Silence doesn't protect you from losing someone. It guarantees it. And Ava, she hadn't left because she didn't care. She had left because he didn't stay. And now, there was nothing left to misunderstand, nothing left to assume, only one truth that settled deeper with every passing moment. He hadn't just lost her, he had let her go. And by the time he finally understood what she was worth, she was already gone. It wasn't planned. That was what made it harder. There was no preparation, no moment to steady herself, no warning to soften the impact. Ava saw him before she realized what she was looking at. Across the room. Familiar, but distant in a way that didn't feel like memory. It felt real. Daniel Carter. For a second, everything around her blurred. The quiet conversations, the soft music, the movement of people passing by. It all faded into something indistinct, because he was there, not in her thoughts, not in the past, right in front of her. And somehow, he looked the same, composed, still, controlled. But there was something else now, something she hadn't seen before, or maybe something she had never noticed, a hesitation. Daniel felt it too, the exact moment their eyes met. It wasn't dramatic, no visible reaction, no sudden movement, just stillness, the kind that holds everything unsaid between two people who once knew each other too well. For a brief second, neither of them moved. Then Ava looked away, not out of fear, not out of pain, just choice. And that was what unsettled him, because before, she would have stayed. She would have held his gaze, waiting for something, giving him space to close the distance. But now she didn't. She turned slightly, as if he were just another person in the room. And for the first time, Daniel felt what she had felt that day. Distance. Real. Unmistakable. He crossed the room before he could think about it. Each step measured, but not as controlled as he wanted it to be. Ava. Her name left his mouth more quietly than he intended. She stopped. Not immediately. Just long enough to show that she had heard him and chosen whether to respond. Then she turned. And when she looked at him, there was no anger, no visible hurt. Just calm. That quiet, steady calm that used to comfort him. Now it felt unfamiliar. Daniel, she said, her voice even. No warmth, no sharpness, just acknowledgement. For a moment, neither of them spoke, because everything that needed to be said had already happened, or hadn't. "I didn't expect to see you here," he said finally. It sounded inadequate the moment he said it. Ava gave a small nod. "Neither did I." Her tone didn't invite more, didn't push him away either. It simply existed. And Daniel realized something then. She wasn't waiting, not for him to explain, not for him to fix anything. She was just standing there, whole, on her own. "How have you been?" he asked. The question felt heavier than it should have. Ava held his gaze for a second, not searching, not softening, just present. "I've been well," she said, and the simplicity of it unsettled him more than anything else, because it sounded true, not forced, not defensive, just real. Another pause, but this one felt different, less fragile, more final. Daniel exhaled slowly, something tightening in his chest as he looked at her, really looked this time. She hadn't changed in the ways he expected, but something was different, not in how she looked, but in how she stood. There was no hesitation in her presence, no quiet reaching, no unspoken question behind her eyes. And that was when it hit him. She wasn't the same woman he had walked away from. "Ava," he started, his voice lower now, but for the first time, he didn't know what came next, because whatever he had come to say didn't feel like enough anymore. And Ava, she didn't help him, didn't fill the silence, didn't make it easier. She just stood there, waiting, not for him to speak, but to see if he finally would. Daniel had faced difficult conversations before. He had negotiated deals, handled pressure, maintained control in situations where others would have faltered. But standing in front of Ava, he felt unprepared. Not because he didn't have something to say, but because he didn't know where to begin. "I should have," he started, then stopped. The words felt incomplete, too small for what he had lost. Ava didn't interrupt, didn't look away. She simply watched him, her expression steady, giving him the space he once refused to give her. And this time, the silence wasn't hers to carry. "I should have asked you what happened," he said finally, his voice quieter now, stripped of its usual control. "I should have listened." The truth settled between them, not dramatic, not loud, but undeniable. Ava held his gaze for a moment, her eyes searching, not for excuses, not for justification, but for something simpler, honesty. And for the first time, Daniel didn't look away from it. I thought walking away would make things easier, he continued, his words slower now, more careful. I told myself it was better than staying in something I didn't understand. A faint breath escaped him, but I didn't realize I was walking away from you. That was the closest he had ever come to saying it, to saying what he felt. And for a moment, the air between them shifted, not enough to go back, but enough to acknowledge what had been lost. Ava's expression softened just slightly, not in weakness, not in surrender, but in recognition. She understood him now, maybe more than she ever had before. But understanding wasn't the same as returning. You didn't lose me because you didn't understand, she said quietly. Her voice carried no blame, no anger, just truth. You lost me because you didn't stay. The words landed gently, but their weight was impossible to ignore. Daniel exhaled, his chest tightening as he absorbed them. For the first time, there was nothing to defend, nothing to explain, only something to face. I know, he said, and this time he meant it. Silence followed, but it was different now. Not empty, not unresolved, just complete. Daniel took a step closer, not enough to close the distance entirely, but enough to show that he was trying. That day, he began, his voice quieted before, if I had stayed. Ava shook her head softly, not dismissing him, just stopping him, because the past wasn't something she was standing in anymore. It was something she had already walked through. You didn't, she said. Simple, final. Daniel's shoulders stilled. He understood. Not everything, but enough. Enough to know that this moment wasn't about rewriting what had happened. It was about what came next. And for the first time, he didn't retreat from it. Ava, he said, her name steady now, grounded in something real. I'm here now. It wasn't a perfect sentence. It wasn't everything she deserved, but it was the truth. And for a brief second, Ava felt it. Not the past, not the pain, just the present. The man in front of her, finally choosing to speak instead of disappear, finally choosing to stay in this moment. She looked at him, really looked this time, at the honesty he had struggled to show, at the understanding that had come too late, but had still come, and she realized something. This wasn't about whether he had changed. It was about whether she had. Ava took a small breath, and then she said it. One word. Stay. It wasn't a request. It wasn't a plea. It was a choice. A choice made not from who she used to be, but from who she had become. And everything shifted, not instantly, not perfectly, but enough. Because this time, if he stayed, it wouldn't be because she waited. It would be because he chose to.